Here we go, another attempt to try to make some sense out of the graffiti and just the general information that's provided in Chapter 1. Please remember these videos are not meant to be a replacement for lecture or studying or doing the work with the general practice questions. The purpose of the graffiti right here is just to prod your memory a little bit. Remember, the general practice questions are by far the best way to pick up the information that you really need to know for the sake of the test. And of course, in that section where we have the answers also, it makes it really easy. Even in that section where we have the self-quiz, the PowerPoint self-quiz, again, it's all about prodding your memory. Textbook is the best source of information for putting a big picture around it all, for putting a frame around it all, so don't forget about all the supplemental materials that we've made available to you. Well, this is part 2 because on the previous one we talked about general terms such as anatomy and physiology, what they stand for. Anatomy, a part cutting, it refers to the structures of the body. Physiology refers to the study of the nature of the body. It's the study of the functions. So these are structures, these are functions right here. We talked about you can look at large structures, you can look at small structures. Large structures would be called gross or macroscopic anatomy. Small structures would be microscopic anatomy. And microscopic anatomy included cytology and histology, which we'll be saying a lot about in chapters 4 and 5. When we talk about gross anatomy right here, we're talking about surface, regional, and systemic. In surface anatomy, you're looking at the outside of the body, and you're recognizing things such as the shape of pupils, eyelids, nose, ears, cheekbones, things like that, if we're talking about this strange picture. But gross anatomy is recognizing that somebody is young or old, male or female, have general normal features or some unique features. So all that external, even superficial stuff, surface anatomy. Another example of gross anatomy is just being able to recognize the difference between male and female general characteristics. Even though it's not absolute, sometimes there is a pattern that's more female or a pattern that's more male. Talking about surface anatomy, again, artists are great examples of surface anatomists. They're able to look at the surface of the body and recognize wrinkles and bumps and grooves. And so when they reproduce the image of the body, they put these in well enough that they convince you that, yes, that's human or at least humanoid. But if they make a mistake, there's something in your mind that looks at it with suspicion and perhaps even disgust. Regional anatomy. Regional anatomy refers to studying one part of the body and comparing it to the rest. For example, a regional anatomist of the mouth might be called a dentist. A regional anatomist of the foot might be called a podiatrist. And there's several other physicians that go after specific regions. Now, please remember, a regional anatomist knows the entire body, and they're quite proud of all the hard work they went through to become, say, a podiatrist or a dentist. So please never assume that they don't know all the rest of the body too, but they are specialists at the region that they chose. Systemic anatomy. Your textbook is divided into, about 11 or 12 systems, beginning with the integumentary system, then the skeletal system, muscular, nervous, cardiovascular, endocrine, immune system, respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive. Again, the chapters are divided according to systems, but the understanding again is that all the systems are interrelated. And it's just for a matter of convenience that we devote a chapter, say, to the circulatory system. We know that everything works together. Well, there you got it. For the big general story, got it. Now let's go with some specifics right here. Comparative anatomy. In comparative anatomy, as you've seen this silly graffiti right here, we're talking about human anatomy compared to that of other animals, such as pigs or apes. One reason why comparative anatomy is particularly important is because when you're trying to understand the human body, sometimes it's helpful to look at other animals, particularly when it comes to things such as surgeries, practicing surgeries. You might want to practice something on a pig heading towards the slaughterhouse before you practice it on a child. Understanding the anatomy, the biochemistry also, of these animals is very helpful when it comes to medicine. As an example, heart-pig valves are very useful when it comes to replacing human heart valves. Likewise, pig skin is very useful when it comes to grafting onto humans with burn problems. Developmental anatomy, really big topic. It refers to all the changes in the structures of the body from the very first moment of conception through life to death and even immediately after death. So it's how your body developed and then later on how it fell apart. Embryology is the first part of developmental anatomy, and it goes from the moment of conception, where the zygote is formed, up to the moment of birth. And so along the way, we have some terms right here that refer to changes that occur inside the mother's body as the child is developing. So here's for instance, something that we've drawn up on the board. It begins off with the idea of a zygote. A zygote is a fertilized egg. It's where the egg and the sperm came together. Mom gave a whole bunch of cytoplasm and 23 DNA molecules. Dad brought 23 DNA molecules. And the end result is you end up a zygote, a brand new you with 46 DNA molecules. 2 sets of information on how to make a human. You're like a very good research paper. You have at least 2 good sources of information. Half for mom, half for dad. You don't look exactly like mom. You don't look exactly like dad. You're a new creation. Well, under the process of mitosis, you can take this one cell and divide it into 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 16 to 32, and now you have a new cluster of cells right here, which is not much bigger than the original zygote, but we changed the name now. It's called morula. And the term morula means, in essence, that it looks like a raspberry, tiny cells that are clustered together. The morula, by the way, is found inside the fallopian tube, also known as the oviduct or the uterine tube. The ovary right here developed the egg and threw the thing out with ovulation. The fimbriae of the fallopian tube, oviduct, uterine tube, hopefully caught the thing up, brought it inside, and approximately 1/3 of the way down, if sperm meets that released egg, there's a possibility of fertilization. From this point on, the zygote developing has to move its way down the fallopian tube, down towards the uterus, and is extremely important. It has about 10 days to develop and get down there and implant itself, produce a hormone called HCG, in order to tell mom's brain that yes, she is pregnant, and no, she shouldn't have another period. If this doesn't happen within that approximately 10 days right there, by the time the developing structure gets to the inside of the uterus, the wall has already begun to break down, somewhere around the 25th day of a so-called normal uterine cycle or menstrual cycle. Not menstrual period, but menstrual cycle. And this breakdown right here would prevent the developed gastrula from actually implanting, making the placenta, and being successful. All right, well, we got to the point of zygote becomes a morula. The morula undergoes more mitosis and develops into a larger structure, and this structure kind of sort of looks like a hollow tennis ball. This thing is called blastula, and the word blast, B-L-A-S-T, refers to beginning, baby, and building. So this is a beginning structure right here, but you don't really seem to have shown up yet. This is moving on down the fallopian tube. By the way, not moving down by itself, but being carried by the cilia that line the inside of the fallopian tube, and also by some wave-like contractions, smooth muscle contractions. Well, the blastula moves on, develops on, and the next step, this hollow kind of a sphere develops a kind of a bump on the inside of it. This is called a gastrula. And the gastrula has the first thing inside that we can pretty much identify as really you. That little bump-like thing is going to develop into the baby. This is going to be more of the sheltering outside amniotic sac and such, and the placenta will be the connection between the two. This is the structure that moves on down inside the uterus, hopefully in time, implants itself inside the wall, the placenta begins to develop, and the HCG is produced. So again, a very precarious beginning to your life, a 10-day rush to get to the right place before everything gets flushed away. And when it comes to developmental anatomy, that was just this little section right here. Now, once that thing becomes implanted, the placenta forms, it will then develop into the embryo stage. And the embryo stage is the one that has the unique, kind of a strange salamander features that tends to spook some people. Sorta, kinda looks like this right here. Sorta, kinda. And this structure right here, again, we're talking about the embryo. Of course, it is connected by to the placenta by umbilical cord. And this unique feature right here, which looks very similar in many developing animal species, here's the tail that you're probably going to lose before you're born. Here are your leg buds that will expand later on. Arm buds that may expand. Here's your heart. It is connected to the trunk of the body, but it's developing pretty much in front of the body. Now, as this structure develops, the body will sort of step up and close the doors around the front of this thing, and that'll be okay. Next thing up here, we have the pharyngeal gill slits. Those things were never functional gills. They really had nothing to do with the respiratory system. They're just sort of like odd features that are noted. And again, they tend to disappear before the child is born. Every once in a while, a child is born with a few flaps on the side of their neck, but it's, yeah. Next thing right here, there's the ear. The ear developed kind of low on the neck region of the embryo right here and does migrate up as the structure develops even more. Next on this thing right here, here's your eye and there's your nose. Your eye and your nose develop right next to each other, connected to each other, and as you grew more, the nose extended downward towards the surface and it maintained a connection with the eye. The lacrimal duct or the tear duct is that original connection between the eye and the nose. And as we've said in class, when somebody cries, they usually get a runny nose, and that sort of indicates the presence of that tube connecting the two. The big lumps right here represent the lobes of the brain. Well, next stage right there would be fetus, and from fetus the child is born, and when the child is born, let's just flip back up here to the cartoons. Child is born, big head, small body, little stalk of a neck connecting the two together. Again, relatively speaking, your head is one of the biggest parts of your body when you're born. As the child grows, it's the torso that tends to grow more so than the head does. And so therefore, infants are easily recognizable with their large head. And so that's part of gross anatomy. If you were drawing a cartoon and you wanted that cartoon to represent a small child, you would give them a small body and a giant head. If you were trying to represent in a cartoon a young child but not a baby, you would start stretching out the lower part. And if you're going towards an adult, you would make the head approximately 1/5 to 1/6 to 1/7 of the length of the entire body. So there we got it, developmental anatomy in its most simple forms. But then we got to throw in this right here, old age. In old age, there are certain things that happen to our general body structure, such as the bending of the thoracic vertebrae, called kyphosis, change in body composition, wrinkles, all kinds of things that are characteristic of the aging process, developmental. And then beyond life, when the person dies, the body doesn't die immediately, it dies in stages. So different tissues die at slightly different rates. And this is the kind of stuff that undertakers and forensic scientists are interested in for all kinds of bizarro reasons.